The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport hummed like a trapped wasp, casting a sterile glow over the chaos of rolling suitcases and echoing intercoms. At Terminal B, a soldier stood rigid beside a flag-draped casket, his stormy eyes locking onto a curious boy who dared to ask, "Why is that man dressed like it's a funeral?" Behind the medals and protocols, Colonel Elias Mercer carried a secret that would unravel more than just a soldier's honor. It would ignite a storm of truth, lies, and redemption. Don't miss a single twist. Hit subscribe and join us as we dive into a story where every flag hides a scar, and every hero wears shadows instead of capes. The Denver International Airport buzzed with the usual chaos. Rolling suitcases, flashing departure boards, and the muffled echoes of intercom announcements. Yet amid the noise, a small figure stood frozen near Terminal B, his tiny fingers clutching the hem of his mother's coat. Oliver, 10 years old with a mop of unruly brown hair, stared at the man in black. The man was tall, his posture rigid, as if his spine had been welded into a steel rod. A black dress uniform adorned his frame, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. But it wasn't the uniform that held Oliver's gaze. It was the flag-draped casket beside him, resting on a wheeled cart. The boy tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "Why is that man dressed like it's a funeral?" His mother followed his gaze. Her breath hitched. "Oh, sweetheart. That's a soldier. He's bringing someone home." "Home?" Oliver frowned. "But the person in the box, they're dead, right?" Before his mother could answer, the soldier turned. His eyes, a stormy gray, sharp yet weary, locked onto Oliver. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. Then the man offered a curt nod, his jaw tightening as if fighting a tide of memories. Elias Mercer had long mastered the art of burying emotions. 23 years in the Army had taught him that grief was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford. Yet today, as he escorted Braden Cole's remains to Helena, the weight felt different. Maybe it was the way the child's question sliced through the airport's white noise, raw and unfiltered. Why the black coat? He glanced at the casket. Braden had been 22. A kid with a crooked grin who joked about Montana's icy winters during their last patrol. Now, Elias was all that stood between Braden and the abyss of being forgotten. A duty, yes, but also a penance. As Elias approached the check-in counter, Oliver's voice trailed after him. "Mom, do soldiers always wear black when someone dies?" The woman hesitated. "It's a sign of respect." "But why?" Elias clenched his fists. Respect. A word the Army hammered into them, respect for the fallen, the mission, the chain of command. Yet here he was, wrestling with the truth he couldn't voice. Respect doesn't fill the silence left behind. The check-in agent, a young woman with a pinned-on smile, scanned his paperwork. Her name tag read Lila. "Everything seems in order, Colonel Mercer," she said, her tone crisp. Then her eyes flicked to the casket. "But I'm afraid we can't allow that on the flight." Elias leaned forward, his voice low. "Ma'am, this is a fallen soldier. Regulations state." "I'm aware of the regulations," Lila interrupted, her smile vanishing. "But we have a full flight. Other passengers, they might panic." "Panic?" Elias almost laughed. Since when did honoring the dead become something to fear? He opened his mouth to argue, but Oliver's question echoed in his skull. Why? A relentless drumbeat. Outside, the Colorado sky deepened into twilight. Somewhere beyond those clouds lay Helena, and a family waiting to bury their son. Elias straightened his coat. This was just the first obstacle. There would be more, and he would face them all. The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport hummed like a trapped wasp, casting a sterile glow over the check-in counter. Lila Hartman's fingers trembled slightly as she stamped a boarding pass, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Keep it professional, she reminded herself. But the casket loomed in her peripheral vision, a monolith of death she couldn't ignore. Colonel Elias Mercer stood before her, his posture unyielding, his eyes sharp enough to cut through her facade. "Ma'am," he repeated, his voice low but edged with steel. "This is a matter of protocol. The Department of Defense has cleared." "Protocol?" Lila snapped louder than intended. A family nearby glanced over, their curiosity prickling the air. She lowered her voice, leaning across the counter. "You think a piece of paper makes this okay? That thing, She gestured to the flag-draped casket. Isn't just cargo. It's a body. People will see it. Elias's jaw twitched. His name was Braden Cole. He was a soldier. And my father was a soldier too, she hissed. The words slipped out before she could cage them. A mistake. For a heartbeat, Elias's rigid demeanor faltered. His gaze flicked to the locket around her neck. A cheap silver thing, its edges tarnished. Inside was a photo she hadn't opened in years. A man in uniform, his smile strained, eyes hollow even in the faded print. PTSD, the VA had called it. A tragic accident, the obituary had lied. Lila straightened, her throat tight. Your protocols didn't save him. They never do. The fluorescent lights of Denver International Airport hummed like a trapped wasp, casting a sterile glow over the check-in counter. Lila Hartman's fingers trembled slightly as she stamped a boarding pass, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. Keep it professional, she reminded herself. But the casket loomed in her peripheral vision. A monolith of death she couldn't ignore. Colonel Elias Mercer stood before her, his posture unyielding, his eyes sharp enough to cut through her facade. Ma'am, he repeated, his voice low but edged with steel. This is a matter of protocol. The Department of Defense has cleared. Protocol. Lila snapped louder than intended. A family nearby glanced over, their curiosity prickling the air. She lowered her voice, leaning across the counter. You think a piece of paper makes this okay? That thing, she gestured to the flag-draped casket, isn't just cargo. It's a body. People will see it. Elias's jaw twitched. His name was Braden Cole. He was a soldier. And my father was a soldier too, she hissed. The words slipped out before she could cage them. A mistake. For a heartbeat, Elias's rigid demeanor faltered. His gaze flicked to the locket around her neck. A cheap silver thing, its edges tarnished. Inside was a photo she hadn't opened in years. A man in uniform, his smile strained, eyes hollow even in the faded print. PTSD, the VA had called it. A tragic accident, the obituary had lied. Lila straightened, her throat tight. Your protocols didn't save him. They never do. Flashback. 8 years earlier. The porch light flickered as Lila, 17 and trembling, dialed 911. Dad's, he's not breathing, she choked out. Through the window, she could see him slumped in his armchair, an empty pill bottle glinting in his hand. The medals on the wall, bronze star, purple heart, watched in silent judgment. When the paramedics arrived, one of them muttered, "Another vet bites the dust." The words carved into her like shrapnel. Back at the counter, Elias studied her. "This isn't about your father," he said, softer now. "Isn't it?" She laughed bitterly. "You're all the same. Dress up the dead in flags and speeches, but where were you when he was rotting alive?" Her nails dug into her palms. "That casket? It's just another prop for your noble cause." Elias's hand hovered over the folded flag atop the casket. Braden deserved better than to die in a... He stopped himself, swallowing the words. "In a what?" Lila pressed. "Go on. Tell me how he heroically sacrificed himself." The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate. Then Elias reached into his coat and slid a photo across the counter. A young man with sun-bleached hair and a fishing rod grinned up at them, Montana's mountains framing his back. "He was supposed to take his niece camping next week," Elias said quietly. "Instead, I'm delivering him to her in a box." Lila's resolve wavered. For a moment, she saw her father in that photo. Not the broken man he'd become, but the one who'd taught her to ride a bike, his laughter echoing through summers now lost. Then the intercom blared. "Final boarding for Flight 227 to Helena." She shoved the photo back. "Take the next flight. Alone." Elias didn't move. "You know I can't do that." "Then neither can I." Her voice cracked. "Get out of my line." As he turned, the casket's wheels screeched against the floor. A sound that would haunt her dreams. The airport's food court reeked of stale coffee and fried grease. A symphony of clattering trays and half-hearted laughter. Declan Rhodes leaned against a pillar, his phone angled to capture the perfect shot. The casket near Terminal B was a goldmine, his ticket to viral fame. He adjusted his leather jacket, the fake silver star pinned crookedly on its lapel, and hit record. "Yo fam! he barked into the camera, his voice dripping with faux outrage. Check this out. Another military puppet trying to guilt-trip us with a dead soldier. He zoomed in on Elias, who stood rigid beside the casket, his back to the crowd. Bet they're hiding some dirty secret. Always are. The live chat exploded. Expose them, Dec. What's in the coffin? Hero my ass. Declan smirked. He'd learned early that rage sold better than reason. 2 years ago, he'd been a nobody stacking shelves in Boise. Now he had 500,000 followers who lapped up his veteran truth bombs. Never mind that he'd never served. The hickey-colored hair and fabricated war stories were enough. He shouldered through the gathering crowd, phone aloft. Hey, Colonel, he shouted. How much did the Pentagon pay you to haul this PR stunt? Elias turned slowly, his gaze slicing through Declan like a scalpel. Step aside. Or what? Declan sneered, edging closer. You'll arrest me? Oh wait, you're not a real cop, just a glorified corpse chauffeur. The crowd murmured. A teenager snickered. Elias's hand flexed, but he remained still. That casket holds a soldier who deserves respect. Walk away. Respect. Declan jabbed a finger at the fake medal on his chest. I earned this in Fallujah. Where's your loyalty, huh? Covering up war crimes. A woman in the crowd gasped. Elias's eyes narrowed. Fallujah? What unit? Declan froze. Shit. He'd cribbed his service history from Wikipedia. 3rd Marines. Bravo Company. Bravo Company was in Ramadi that year. Elias's voice dropped, lethal calm. And the silver star you're wearing? He stepped forward, towering over Declan. It's upside down. The crowd stirred. Declan's phone trembled. Chat messages blurred. He's a fraud. LMAO, this is gold. You're lying. Declan blustered, retreating. I bled for this country. Then show me your D214, Elias said, relentless. Prove it. Sweat soaked Declan's collar. The camera caught every twitch. He lunged, shoving Elias. Stop silencing the truth. The casket wobbled. Elias caught it, his face a mask of cold fury. But before he could react, a voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Gwen, the middle-aged activist from the protest line, marched forward, her neon pink scarf blazing like a warning flag. I've seen your type before, she spat at Declan. Parasites feeding on pain. That man, she pointed to Elias, is doing what you never could, facing the consequences. Declan's phone clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. The livestream died mid-scream. Gwen's fingers tightened around the strap of her canvas tote bag. The word peace emblazoned across it in faded red letters. She had spent a decade shouting that word into megaphones, painting it on banners, stitching it into scarves. Yet here she stood, in the belly of an airport teeming with uniforms and flags, defending a soldier she'd normally condemn. Irony, she decided, was life's cruelest joke. The crowd around Terminal B had thickened, smartphones raised like torches. Declan Rhodes slunk away, his shattered screen trailing wires of glass, but the spectacle wasn't over. Elias Mercer remained anchored beside the casket, his expression unreadable. Gwen studied him, the taut line of his shoulders, the way his hand lingered near the flag as if guarding a sacred relic. He's just like the rest, she told herself. A cog in the war machine. But then she remembered her son. Flashback. 3 years earlier. Asterisk, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and regret. Gwen stared at the envelope on the table, her son's handwriting slashing across it. Mom, I can't be part of this. I'm sorry. Noah had left for Canada that morning. Draft dodger, the neighbors whispered. Coward, his father spat. But Gwen had said nothing. She'd spent years preaching against militarism. Yet when her own flesh and blood chose exile over a gun, she'd let him go without a word of support. The peace banner above the fireplace mocked her. Back in the airport, a reporter shoved a microphone in Elias's face. Colonel, care to comment on the accusations of a cover-up? Gwen's chest tightened. She recognized the hunger in the reporter's eyes, the same hunger that had devoured Noah's reputation. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the buzz. Enough. All eyes turned. Even Elias stiffened, his gaze wary. Gwen straightened her scarf, the neon pink clashing against her gray hair. This man, she said, pointing to Elias, is bringing a soldier home. Whatever your politics, that deserves basic decency. A young man in the crowd snorted. Decency? The military bombs kids and calls it collateral damage. And what have you done to stop it? Gwen fired back. Post hashtags? Throw soup at paintings. She turned to Elias, her voice softening. I've spent my life fighting wars, but not the people trapped in them. Elias studied her, his eyes narrowing. Why defend me? Because my son ran. The admission tasted like ash. He chose himself over duty. You, she gestured to the casket, are choosing someone else's son over your own comfort. That's rare. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A woman lowered her phone, her sneer fading. Elias's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. A crack in the armor. It's not about choice, he said quietly. It's about finishing what he started. Gwen reached into her tote and pulled out a white poppy, a symbol she'd once despised for its association with military remembrance. She placed it on the casket. Then finish it. But don't pretend this, she tapped the flag, absolves anyone of the truth. The airport chapel was a cramped afterthought. Flickering tea lights, plastic pews, and a stained glass window depicting faceless angels. Elias sat in the back row, his hands clasped around a cold cup of coffee. The flag-draped casket loomed beside him, a silent companion. Outside, the crowd had dispersed, but their whispers still clung to the air like smoke. The door creaked open. A figure in a crisply pressed uniform stepped in, his shadow stretching across the floor. Colonel Mercer. Elias didn't turn. He recognized the voice, Ronan Voss, his former superior, a man who wielded paperwork like a scalpel. Sir, Elias said flatly, here to enforce the Pentagon's protocols? Ronan sighed, settling into the pew beside him. The smell of peppermint gum and regret followed. You've made this messier than it needed to be. Braden's family deserves the truth. The truth. Ronan's laugh was hollow. The truth is a luxury, Elias. You of all people should know that. He pulled a file from his briefcase and slid it over. Read it. The first page was a coroner's report. Elias's pulse spiked. Cause of death: acute alcohol poisoning. No evidence of combat injuries. He died in a ditch outside base, Ronan said, his tone clinical. Got wasted celebrating his promotion. Choked on his own vomit. Not exactly heroic, is it? Elias's knuckles whitened. Braden's face flashed in his mind, young, eager, always first to volunteer for night patrols. Montana's got the best trout, sir, he'd said once, grinning over a campfire. Gonna teach my niece to fish when I'm back. Why the cover-up? Elias growled. Think about it. Ronan leaned closer. A decorated soldier dies drunk off duty? The media would feast on it. Recruitment numbers are already in the gutter. We gave him an honorable narrative. Killed in a training accident. Everyone wins. Everyone. The word curdled in Elias's throat. He stood abruptly, the file scattering. You don't get to rewrite his life. And you don't get to play martyr. Ronan snapped, rising. Deliver the casket, stick to the script and walk away. That's the job. The job. Elias turned, his voice trembling. You sent me to escort a lie. His family will bury him thinking he died a hero. Would you rather they bury him in shame? The chapel's air thickened. Somewhere a fluorescent light buzzed like a dying insect. Elias stared at the casket. The flag seemed to pulse. A heartbeat woven from threads of red, white, and blue. They'll know, he said finally. Ronan froze. What? I'll tell them. Today. You'll destroy his legacy. And your career. Elias stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Ronan's. What legacy? The one you invented. He grabbed the file, crumpling it into his coat pocket. Braden wasn't perfect. But he deserved more than a lie draped over his coffin. Ronan's composure cracked. Elias, don't. The flight to Helena leaves in 2 hours, Elias interrupted, heading for the door. With or without your permission. Flashback. 3 weeks earlier. Braden leaned against the barracks wall. A flask glinting in his hand. You ever feel like you're just a prop, sir? He slurred. They give us medals but they don't give a shit about us. Elias had taken the flask. You're better than this, Cole. Braden laughed, bitter and broken. Am I? Now Elias stood in the chapel doorway, the weight of the file burning through his coat. Am I? The rental car smelled of synthetic pine and regret. Elias tossed his duffel bag into the back seat, the casket secured in a trailer hitched behind. Night had swallowed the Rockies, and the highway stretched ahead like a scar across the darkness. His phone buzzed. A number labeled Skyline Airways. He answered on the third ring. Colonel Mercer, a smooth baritone crooned. Victor Hale here. I trust my team explained our generous offer. Elias leaned against the car, the cold metal biting through his coat. A private flight for the casket? Sounds more like a PR stunt. Victor chuckled. Perception is reality, Colonel. This scandal's trending everywhere. Let us handle the optics. Dignified send-off, heartfelt press release. You get Braden home, we get goodwill. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. The phrase echoed Ronan's earlier pitch. Elias stared at the trailer, where the flag fluttered like a ghost in the rearview light. And Braden's family? What do they win? Closure, Victor said, too quickly. A hero's farewell. Elias hung up. The engine growled to life. He drove for hours, the radio spitting static until he shut it off. Memories flickered. Braden laughing in the mess hall. Braden vomiting behind a barack. Braden's voice slurring. They don't give a shit about us. Near dawn, a battered sign loomed. Welcome to Silver Spring 1203. Elias slowed. The town was a skeleton, shuttered stores, a lone diner with flickering neon. Braden's service record had mentioned this place. Drunk driving incident 2019. Civilian casualty. Swept under the rug. He parked outside the rusty Anchor, the bar's windows boarded up. A faded for sale sign clung to the door. According to the file Ronan had forced on him, this was where Braden, 3 sheets to the wind, had swerved into a minivan. A woman died. Her family received no apology, no compensation. Just a check from the Army marked confidential settlement. Elias knocked on a weathered house across the street. A man in his 50s answered, eyes narrowing at the uniform. What does the Army want now? Nothing, Elias said. He handed him an envelope, every cent of his savings. This is from Braden Cole. He'd want you to have it. The man stared at the cash. Braden? That's the bastard who killed my wife. Yes. Why now? Because he's dead. Elias met his gaze. And I'm tired of lies. The man crumpled the envelope, then stopped. His hands shook. You think money fixes anything? No, Elias said. But it's a start. Back on the road, dawn bled into the sky. Elias's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Last chance, Colonel. Hale's offer expires at sunrise. He deleted it. The trailer bumped along the highway, the flag now mud-splattered but intact. Elias thought of Braden's niece waiting in Helena, of the fishing trip that would never happen. Dan du tuk tsunamo vik dam nintang veo sai lam. Honor wasn't in the flag, it was in the choice to stop pretending. The cemetery in Helena was a sea of umbrellas, black fabric rustling like crow wings under the drizzle. Elias stood at the edge of Braden Cole's grave, his uniform soaked through, the metals on his chest dulled by rain. The crowd was smaller than expected. A handful of relatives, a few old soldiers, and Gwen, her pink scarf a defiant splash of color against the gloom. Braden's niece, Lily, clung to her mother's hand. She was 7, with braids fraying at the ends and a stuffed trout tucked under her arm. Is Uncle Bray a hero now? She whispered. Elias knelt, mud seeping into his knees. He was brave, he said carefully. But heroes are complicated. Like how trout have bones, she asked. Exactly like that. The pastor cleared his throat, signaling the start of the eulogy. Elias stepped back, his fingers brushing the folded speech in his pocket, the one the Pentagon had written. Instead, he pulled out a crumpled photo of Braden fishing, the edges softened by rain. Braden Cole wasn't perfect, Elias began, his voice carrying over the tombstones. He laughed too loud, drank too much, and once crashed a Humvee into a general's prized rosebush. A ripple of uneasy laughter. He also taught me that honor isn't something you stitch onto a uniform. It's what you do when no one's watching. He paused, the weight of Ronan's file heavy in his mind. Braden died because he made a mistake. A mistake the army tried to bury. But hiding the truth doesn't honor him. It erases him. Today, I'm choosing to remember the whole man. The good, the flawed, the real. Silence fell, broken only by the patter of rain. Then Gwen stepped forward, placing a white poppy on the casket. "Thank you," she murmured. As the crowd dispersed, a woman approached. Lila Hartman, her airport badge still clipped to her blouse. "I saw the news," she said, her voice taut. "You really told them everything?" Elias nodded. "Turns out the truth isn't as scary as we think." Lila's gaze drifted to the grave. "My dad. He lied about how he got his Purple Heart. Stole someone else's story." She laughed bitterly. "Maybe I hated the military because I hated him." "Hate's a heavy thing to carry alone," Elias said. She hesitated, then unpinned her locket and dropped it into the grave. Let it rot with the rest. That night, Elias sat in a dim motel room, Braden's file burning in the trash can. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You gave my mom the money." "Why?" It was signed Emily Silverspring. He typed back. "Because someone should have said sorry." A photo arrived. A child's drawing of a soldier and a woman holding hands under a rainbow. "Mom would have liked you," Emily wrote. Elias stared at the screen until the motel's neon sign flickered off. Dawn crept through the curtains, pale and unburdened. Epilogue. Weeks later, a package arrived at Elias's doorstep. Inside was Braden's fishing rod and a note from Lily. "Teach me?" At the riverbank, as Lily giggled over her first catch, Elias finally removed his black coat. The sun warmed his shoulders, and for the first time in decades, the weight felt bearable. Honor, he realized, wasn't a color. It was the light that remained when all the lies burned away. As the rain-soaked crowd disperses from Braden Cole's grave, Elias Mercer slips a crumpled photo into his pocket. A snapshot of a flawed man, not a myth. But the storm isn't over. Whispers of a leaked file ripple through the Pentagon, and a single text lights up Elias's phone. "They know what you did." What happens when the Army's lies catch fire? Stay tuned, because the truth never stays buried, and neither does the next chapter.